When night settles in and the outside world slowly falls quiet, you may still hear something deeply familiar, the stream of thoughts that refuses to come to rest. Today may have been too long. Too much information, too many questions, too many things to understand, to remember, to become. The modern mind is rarely allowed true rest, even when the body is already lying still in the dark. This video was not created to teach you anything new. It does not ask for your attention, your focus, or your commitment to reach the end. It is simply a very gentle invitation, an invitation to step into a slow journey where science and philosophy are no longer dry concepts but become soft stories about the universe and about you. Within that vastness, the deeper questions of meaning of existence, of the human sense of dislocation, are not meant to be solved but to be set down quietly. As Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." But tonight you do not need to awaken in the usual sense. You only need to listen. Let this voice think for you. Let the universe continue its motion. And if at some moment you feel yourself drifting away, that is not missing out. That is the destination. As the night begins to slow, not because time itself has changed, but because you no longer need to chase it, the light in the room softens. The familiar sounds of the day, notifications, voices, the hurried rhythm of thought gently recede into the distance. And within that quiet, something very small is happening. You are allowed to stop. Not to do better, not to understand more deeply, simply to be here. Perhaps all day you have been carrying too much. Questions left unanswered, thoughts looping as if without holding tightly to them they might disappear. But the night asks you to carry nothing. It does not require proof progress or self-improvement. It opens only a wide patient space where everything is permitted to slow down according to its own natural rhythm. Philosophy, when it walks alongside the night, is no longer a system to memorize. It becomes a way of listening. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Yet this quiet does not come from controlling thought, but from releasing the need to direct it. When you stop forcing attention, the mind begins to soften like water when the wind has finally stilled. In this moment, you do not need to follow every sentence. If an idea passes by without being grasped, that is perfectly fine. If an image appears and dissolves, there is no need to keep it. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge." But tonight, you do not need to think and you do not need to judge. You only need to allow things to pass without holding on. Let this voice exist as a very slow movement in the background of awareness. Like distant starlight, you do not need to look directly at it to know it is there. And if as you listen, you feel yourself gradually drifting away from familiar patterns of thought, that is not distraction. It is a sign that the night has begun to do its work. There is no destination to reach here, no conclusion waiting at the end. As the night slows, everything may be set down gently. And within that slowness, sleep is not something you must search for. It is something that will arrive on its own once you are no longer in a hurry to remain awake. When the night has slowed long enough, when thoughts no longer crowd one another for attention, you may begin to sense a vast openness unfolding. It feels like silence, not an empty silence, but a deep settling. And it is here that a familiar misunderstanding often arises. We are quick to believe that this quiet is a void, that where there is no sound, no clear image, nothing exists at all. But the universe has never been that way. Space, the thing we casually call emptiness, has never been nothing. Between the stars, across distances that feel almost infinite, there is always presence. Gas, dust, enormous molecular clouds drifting so slowly that human ideas of movement no longer apply. They are not in a hurry to arrive anywhere. They simply remain silently over millions of years, carrying structures the naked eye cannot perceive. The stillness we attribute to the universe is largely a subjective experience. It arises from the limits of human senses: ears that require vibrating air, eyes that require reflected light, minds that need change to happen fast enough to register. The universe does not operate on that rhythm. It does not need to draw attention in order to exist. It does not need to speak to prove that it is alive with motion. In a quiet way, this mirrors the inner life of a human being. There are feelings, thoughts, and inner movements that unfold too slowly, too deeply for us to notice if we only listen for noise. And so we assume there is nothing there. But silence is not emptiness. It is simply another layer of presence. The philosopher Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished." These words do not belong only to the natural world outside us. They describe the way the universe itself exists. There are no rushed leaps, no explosions demanding witnesses. Everything moves at its own pace, and for that very reason, it is easy to miss if we insist on drama. When we look up at the night sky, we see far more darkness than light. The mind trained to fill gaps concludes that the dark regions are empty. Yet within those shadows, clouds of gas slowly contract, chemical reactions unfold at an unhurried pace. Particles interact without spectacle. The life of the universe does not reside in its brightest moments, but in processes that are long patient and unconcerned with being observed. And perhaps tonight, as you lie here listening to these words, you are in a similar state. Outside, nothing obvious may be happening. Inside, no clear thought may be speaking. But that does not mean you are empty. It may be a sign that deeper layers of awareness are at work in their own way, quiet, uninsistent, unconcerned with being remembered. Carl Jung once reminded us, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." And sometimes what appears to be absence is simply an order unfolding beyond the reach of attention. The universe is not empty. It simply does not perform in the ways we are used to watching. When you allow yourself to stop filling the quiet with thought, to stop interpreting every sensation, you begin to synchronize with that slower rhythm. You do not need to understand what molecular clouds are. You do not need to picture precisely how gas and dust drift. It is enough to know that even in the deepest apparent void there is presence, and that presence does not require your wakefulness to be real. From here, this journey continues to widen. From the stillness of night to the stillness of space, from the slow rhythm of the mind to the slow rhythm of the universe. There is no sharp boundary between inner and outer, only a long, wide current carrying everything without asking to be named. And if at some point you can no longer tell where the voice ends, and your own thoughts begin where the surrounding quiet merges with what is within, that is entirely fine. It is not disorientation. It is simply the moment when awareness stops standing apart and begins to dissolve gently into a universe that was never empty at all. Once you have grown accustomed to the quiet of space, once awareness no longer rushes to fill every gap with thought, something else begins to appear very gently, very slowly. Not images of stars, nor the dizzying sense of infinite distance, but a quiet realization even in places not meant for humans. There are things that feel strangely familiar. Drifting through interstellar clouds of gas and dust are molecules that if encountered on Earth we would recognize immediately. Familiar chemical structures, combinations of atoms that the human body uses every day to breathe, to remember, to feel. The strange thing is not that they exist out there, but that they do not require life in order to exist. Chemistry does not wait for biology. Matter does not need consciousness to combine, to break apart, and to rearrange itself. There is something deeply comforting in this awareness, that the foundations of life are not a fragile miracle that happened only once. They were already there, drifting patiently cold and indifferent without purpose and without an audience. And when conditions allow somewhere, they briefly assemble into life like a chance moment within a very long process. The familiarity we feel in this idea is not joyful excitement. It is quieter, deeper, like realizing that an old song is not tied to a single memory, but to the rhythm of your breathing at a certain time in your life. Those molecules do not remember us, yet they have been and still are part of every story of existence. The philosopher Epicurus once wrote, "Nothing comes from nothing." Perhaps he was pointing not only to a physical principle, but to a deeper intuition about continuity. There is no absolute beginning, no complete separation. Everything is simply a temporary form of the same current of matter passing through different states at different speeds in different contexts. When we think of the universe as distant, hostile, not meant for us, we often feel excluded. But this sense of familiarity is not about pulling the universe closer to serve human meaning. Instead, it softens the self by showing that humans were never the center of the story. We are only one way matter briefly learned to look back at itself for a short moment on a very small planet. Carl Sagan once reminded us we are made of star stuff. The phrase has become so familiar that it is easy to overlook. But when it settles into the night, it reveals another layer. Not grandeur, but humility. Not pride, but relief. That what makes you your body and your most private thoughts is not something that must struggle to justify its existence. It is simply continuing a motion that began long ago. And so when you feel lost, when you sense that you do not quite belong here, perhaps that is not a personal failure. Perhaps it is a faint memory of a larger truth that there is no place truly meant for humans. We are always in a state of temporary residence in this body, in this life, in this particular form of matter. Comfort does not come from insisting on meaning. It comes from realizing that you do not need meaning in order to be allowed to exist. The molecules out there do not worry about what they are doing. They do not ask whether their combinations are worthy. They simply do what matter has always done, interact, transform, and continue to drift. From the quiet of space to the familiarity of chemistry, this journey is slowly easing us away from the need to be special. Not by denying human value, but by placing that value within a wider, gentler context. One where you do not need to hold yourself together to avoid dissolving. And as awareness loosens, as boundaries grow softer, you can let that sense of familiarity spread not as a thought to be understood, but as a very low, steady background tone. Like knowing that even as you fall asleep, even as personal stories pause for the night, matter continues its slow motion. And in that silent movement, nothing is ever truly left behind. Once you have grown familiar with the idea that familiar matter drifts throughout space, once the strangeness of the universe has softened into a vague sense of belonging, this journey carries us onward to a place even quieter still. Not a realm of shining stars, but a place before light itself. The place where stars are born. There is no glittering night sky there. No points of brightness for the human eye to hold on to. Only immense clouds of gas and dust, cold and dense, moving so slowly that the very notion of motion almost loses its meaning. They do not travel in clear directions. They have no destination. They simply exist, shaped gently by gravity, by time, by interaction so small yet so persistent that they endure for millions of years. Within these dark regions, the universe is doing something vast without needing a witness. Gas gradually gathers. Dust slowly grows heavier. Denser regions begin to form not because of a decision, but because there is no reason for it not to happen. There is no explosion, no dramatic transition. Only a quiet compression patient and unyielding unfolding across immense spans of time. This runs against human intuition. We are used to believing that birth must arrive with sound, with a clear moment, with a marker worth remembering. But the universe has no need for memory. It does not mark dates. A star does not begin on a single day, but across a stretch of time so long that no precise beginning can be named. Birth here is a process, not an event. And perhaps that is why it carries such a deep sense of healing. If the greatest things in the universe can come into being in silence, then perhaps humans too do not need to rush to become something. Perhaps the most meaningful transformations within an inner life also unfold quietly, without applause, without immediate recognition. The philosopher Heraclitus once wrote, "Nature loves to hide." This line is often read as a comment on how elusive reality can be. But in the stillness of night, another layer becomes audible. Not that nature is hiding itself on purpose, but that what truly happens does not need to be displayed. The universe does not conceal the birth of stars. It simply does not make noise. Within that silence, gravity works tirelessly. It does not yank or demand. It does not force. It merely invites matter closer little by little. And given enough time, that invitation becomes impossible to refuse. A warm core slowly forms. Temperature rises, pressure increases, and then at a moment no one can precisely point to, a star begins to exist. Viewed through the pace of human life, it may seem as though nothing is happening at all. But when we synchronize with the rhythm of the universe, we begin to see that slowness itself is what makes life stable. There is no hurry, no mistake to correct. Only time long enough for everything to settle into its own enduring form. Here, a quiet line from Carl Jung drifts through the background of thought. In all chaos, there is a cosmos in all disorder. A secret order. Not all order reveals itself. Some forms of order appear only when we stop searching with impatience. The clouds of gas may look chaotic, yet it is within that very chaos that stars are conceived. When this idea is carried back into human life, something softens. The unclear phases, the stretches that seem motionless, the times when it feels as though nothing is moving forward may not be failures at all. They may simply be periods of accumulation, necessary dark regions where something new is forming still without a name. The birth of stars does not require human eyes to make it real. And perhaps inner growth is the same. It does not need to be told. It does not need to be acknowledged. It only needs time. As you lie here listening to these words, it may appear that nothing outside is changing. Yet, like those distant clouds of gas, very slow movements are taking place. The breath evens out. Thoughts grow sparse. Awareness softens. There is no clear moment when one can say a new state has begun, but that does not mean nothing is happening. From the familiarity of matter to the patience of the universe, this journey gently teaches a simple truth. Not all beginnings require light. Some beginnings can only occur in darkness. And silence is not a void, but the cradle of what will one day shine. As awareness begins to merge with that slower rhythm, there is no need to follow the story any further. Like the stars, you do not need to know exactly when sleep will arrive. It will happen softly, naturally, when time has been long enough. After passing through the dark regions where stars are quietly conceived, this journey opens onto another scene not to astonish, but to gently soften a long-held habit of the mind. A habit that convinces us Earth is the model, that water, air, moderate temperatures, and the familiar forms of human life are the right conditions for a world. But when we look farther out, the universe does not share this belief. There are planets whose surfaces have never known calm. Their rock does not rest. Lava moves like oceans. Temperatures rise so high that every human notion of solid ground loses meaning. Light from the central star does not warm, it scorches. And still that world exists without familiar life, without observers, without needing to be called suitable. There are other planets too, where carbon, the element bound so closely to life on Earth, dominates in a completely different way. Not carbon-forming cells, but carbon becoming the structure of an entire world. There, what we call precious may simply be ground beneath one's feet. What we assign special meaning holds no value beyond a human context. When faced with such worlds, the mind's familiar reflex is comparison. We call them hostile, unwelcoming, failed. Yet these words reflect human inconvenience, not the nature of the universe. These planets were not made to serve. They did not fail to become Earth because they never intended to. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "In Beyond Good and Evil, there are no facts, only interpretations." And perhaps what we call an ideal environment is merely an interpretation tied to our own mode of existence. The universe does not favor one arrangement over another. It only experiments quietly, patiently, without judgment. When we loosen the idea that Earth is the standard, a sense of relief emerges. Not because humanity becomes meaningless, but because the burden of being correct, appropriate, perfected begins to fall away. If lava worlds and carbon worlds each have their place, then perhaps humans need not constantly ask whether they are living the right way. There is a deep healing in recognizing that the universe does not operate by our criteria. That difference is not deviation. That what does not resemble Earth is not something to be fixed. It is simply another possibility realized. On an inner level, this touches something very familiar. How often we measure ourselves against standards we did not create. How often we feel unsuitable, not quite right, not close enough to some imagined ideal. But if the universe can hold worlds without referencing Earth, perhaps human life too can hold forms of being that do not need to resemble anyone else. Albert Camus once wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. Not every struggle leads to the same summit, and not every summit takes the same shape." A lava planet does not try to become a blue one. It simply continues as itself within its own conditions and rhythms. When this idea returns to the night, to this moment, as you lie here listening, a certain pressure may begin to dissolve. The pressure to become the best version. The pressure to fit vague definitions of success, normality, correctness. The universe does not demand uniformity. It opens countless ways of existing, and none must ask permission from another. From stars born in silence to planets unlike Earth, this current gently carries us away from the habit of judgment. Not to make us indifferent, but to make us more tolerant toward the world and toward ourselves. And as you allow awareness to drift with that slower rhythm, you no longer need to remember lava or carbon. You only need to carry this feeling that standards are temporary agreements, not verdicts. That difference is not a sign of error, but a sign of a universe wider than we imagined. Within that spaciousness, you are allowed to exist at your own pace, not like Earth, not like any planet at all. Simply quiet enough to realize that in a universe without a single standard, ease is not something to be achieved. It is something that naturally appears when you stop trying to become one. After leaving behind the idea of Earth as a standard, this journey carries us toward an image that can feel quietly unsettling planets, where matter is compressed to its absolute limits, where pressure does not merely bend rock, but bends human intuition itself. There, the things we call rare, precious symbols of beauty and power exist in vast abundance, silently, without admiration, without witnesses. On such worlds, carbon, a familiar element, does not assemble into life but is forced into the hardest structures matter can achieve. Under unimaginable pressure, carbon becomes diamond. Not as a reward, not as a treasure. Simply as an inevitable physical state once the conditions are sufficient. There is no one there to call it beautiful, no gaze that longs for it. Diamonds do not know that on Earth, humans have wrapped them in stories of eternity, love, and value. In the universe, a diamond is only one way matter rearranges itself when pressed too long, too hard, too deep. And here, a very gentle question appears, not to be answered but to be set down. If beauty can exist without being seen, is it still beauty at all? Or is it simply a neutral state later clothed in meaning by human minds? Immanuel Kant once wrote in Critique of Judgment, "Beauty is no quality in things themselves, it exists merely in the mind which contemplates them." Placed beside the image of diamond planets, these words soften in a curious way. Not to deny human aesthetic feeling, but to remind us that such feeling is not the center of reality. The universe does not need to be called beautiful in order to continue. Pressure, something humans often avoid, carries no negative meaning here. It does not punish. It does not test. It is simply a condition. When strong enough and long enough pressure does not destroy matter, it restructures it. Not all pressure creates diamonds, but diamonds cannot exist without pressure. And it is here that a very quiet connection to human life begins to form. How often we wonder why difficult periods last so long. How often we wish they would end sooner, more gently, more understandably. But the universe does not operate according to wishes. It operates according to conditions. And sometimes the condition for a different form of existence to emerge is prolonged compression. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." This line is often read in a hurried way as a demand to overcome. But set beside the image of diamond worlds, it can be read more slowly. Not every pressure makes us stronger immediately. But some pressures, if they do not break us slowly, alter our inner structure in ways we may not even notice while enduring them. What is striking is this: diamonds have no value in the environment where they are born. They cannot be traded. They do not represent anything. Their value appears only when placed within a human context, a world of scarcity symbols and desire. Removed from that context, a diamond is simply matter under pressure. And this reveals a very gentle truth. Value is not a fixed property of things. It is an agreement, a story, a way of seeing. When humans are absent, concepts like precious, luxurious, or desirable quietly dissolve like echoes with no one left to hear them. When this insight turns back toward the self, a sense of relief can arise. How much pressure in life comes from trying to be valuable, to be significant, to be rare enough to be noticed? But the universe does not demand this. It does not rank planets. It does not favor beautiful structures. It simply allows what can exist to exist. From planets unlike Earth to worlds where diamonds are only physical consequences, this current is slowly loosening a familiar burden, the pressure to have meaning. Perhaps not everything needs meaning in order to be allowed to be here. Perhaps existing is enough. And as the night grows deep, as the mind softens, you no longer need to carry images of diamonds or pressure with you. You only need to feel this, that even under the harshest conditions, the universe does not judge. It does not praise. It does not condemn. It simply continues. Within that continuation, you are also allowed to loosen your definitions of your own worth. You do not need to shine. You do not need to be unbreakable. You only need to be held in quiet compression long enough and allow sleep like a very gentle pressure to do its work. When we speak about time, we usually think in numbers: hours, minutes, seconds, milestones to reach, deadlines to remember. In human life, time feels like a steady current, non-negotiable, unyielding, never pausing for anyone. But the universe does not share this experience. Far from our familiar rhythms, time does not flow evenly. It does not move at the same speed for everything. It bends, stretches, softens alongside space and matter. Near black holes where gravity is strong enough to curve, even light time slows. To a distant observer, an object falling toward a black hole appears to decelerate almost to a standstill. Its final seconds stretch into infinity. Not because the object resists time, but because time there is no longer the same as ours. It does not follow the same rhythm. It does not need to synchronize. In an expanding universe, time carries yet another character. As space itself stretches and galaxies drift farther apart, the cadence of physical processes shifts very slowly. very deeply. There is no central clock counting for the entire universe. Each region of space carries its own tempo. Each existence moves through time in a way that does not fully align with any other. Heard in daylight, this idea can feel disorienting, but at night, when the mind has softened, it offers a quiet comfort. The feeling that time moves too fast or too slowly is not your fault. It is a valid experience of consciousness. For even in the universe, time is not distributed evenly. The philosopher Henri Bergson once wrote in Time and Free Will, "Time is not a thing, but a qualitative flow, not an object to be measured, but a stream of experience." Read slowly, these words suggest that time is not only something happening outside us, but something felt from within. Some moments last longer than themselves. Some stretches pass without leaving a trace. In this understanding, time is no longer a pursuer. It becomes a soft substance, sometimes dense, sometimes thin, sometimes almost dissolving into space. And if time is soft, then feeling slower or left behind then loses its negative meaning. It simply means your rhythm does not match that of a particular system. Near black holes, time does not vanish. It changes shape. In expanding space, time does not stop, it elongates. And in the inner life of a human being, time behaves in much the same way. When exhausted, an hour can weigh like a day. When at ease, an entire evening can dissolve into a few breaths. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In being and time is not something which is found, but something which is made." Not in the sense of control, but of experience. Time is formed through the way we are present. When we rush, it rushes. When we slow, it slows. Not because the universe bends to us, but because consciousness is where time is felt. There is a deep healing in allowing time to soften. When you do not force yourself to move faster than your inner sense allows. When you stop trying to use every minute. When you let an evening pass without demanding a result. This is not wasting time. It is living within a different kind of time, a time that does not need to prove itself. In the universe, there is no clock measuring existence, no marker declaring the right moment. A star may take millions of years to form and billions to fade. No one calls it slow. No one calls it late. It simply moves in its own rhythm. And when this awareness is brought into tonight, into this very moment, a familiar weight may fall away. The pressure to fall asleep quickly, to rest efficiently, to recover correctly. But sleep does not arrive on command. It comes when inner time has grown soft enough. Laozi once wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Not because nature follows clear goals, but because it does not resist its own rhythm." Natural time is not a straight line, but a gentle cycle, gathering, releasing, and gathering again. From diamond planets, where prolonged pressure reshapes matter, to black holes, where time nearly comes to rest. This current gently reminds you of one thing: not all movement requires the same speed. Not all lives need the same rhythm. And if right now you feel yourself drifting out of familiar time, no longer aware of the hour, no longer certain how long you have been listening, that is perfectly fine. It is not a loss of control. It is simply entering a different region of time, one that is not measured, one that only needs to be inhabited. The voice may slow, the sentences may thin out, not because ideas have run dry, but because time no longer needs to be filled. And in that softening, sleep can arrive quite naturally, not as an ending, but as a place where time stops flowing evenly and begins to move at your pace. When we speak of the Big Bang, the human mind almost instinctively summons a familiar image, a colossal explosion blazing and thunderous erupting into a dark void, hurling everything outward in all directions. It is a powerful dramatic picture, and also a very human one. It reflects the way we are used to understanding the world. Every beginning must be loud. Every change must make a sound. And because of that, the Big Bang is often misunderstood from its very name. In truth, the Big Bang was not an explosion. No sound echoed through the universe. There was no center from which everything burst outward. No direction of blast, no edge, no outside against which to compare it. What happened and what is still happening is simply a very slow expansion. So quiet that without mathematics, without the faint traces left by ancient light, we might never have noticed it at all. The universe did not explode into space. Space itself was born with that expansion. Before the Big Bang, there was no place for an explosion to occur. Only an unimaginably hot, unimaginably dense state where all distances were nearly zero. And then not through a violent shove, but through a gentle motion, the universe began to stretch. Distances between all things increased. Space lengthened. Time began to flow. If you imagine galaxies as tiny dots on the surface of a balloon being inflated, there is no central dot. Each dot sees all the others moving away. From any position, the universe appears to be opening in every direction. And so the feeling that we are in the middle is only an illusion born from the limits of our own perspective. This truth carries a very different feeling from the origin stories humans are used to telling. There is no climax, no explosive moment to remember. Only a gradual change, so gradual that even now, as you lie still and listen, the universe continues to expand by infinitesimal amounts, steady and patient. This invites a gentle yet profound question. If the beginning of everything did not require an explosion, do the beginnings in our own lives truly need to be so loud? Perhaps many of the most important changes unfold like the Big Bang itself, quietly unnoticed as the distance between old things slowly widens to make room for the new. The expansion of the universe has no intention. It does not want to become larger. It simply follows deep natural laws. And in that indifference, there is a strange kind of beauty. No meaning assigned in advance, no message to deliver, only the unfolding itself. As Spinoza wrote in Ethics, things could not have been produced by God in any other way or in any other order than is the case. The universe did not choose how it began. It simply began in the only way it could. When we understand the Big Bang as a process rather than a moment, time itself becomes softer. There is no sharp starting point to cling to, only a hazy region where our familiar concepts space-time causation begin to dissolve. And within that haze, certainty is no longer required. Perhaps that is why the Big Bang, when understood this way, can be strangely calming. It does not demand that we grasp it. It does not require precise imagination. It allows us to accept that some things can only be felt as a flow, rather than told as a story with a clear beginning and end. The light left over from the universe's earliest era, what science calls the cosmic microwave background, still passes through Earth every second. A very faint, very cold echo of a time when everything was far closer together. It carries no message. It tells no story. It is simply there, like the universe's background breath. And if we listen long enough, we may realize the Big Bang never truly ended. It is not confined to a distant past. It is continuing right now in the slow expansion of all distances in the way galaxies drift apart in the deep silence between the stars. Seen this way, the Big Bang is no longer an event to marvel at. It becomes a baseline rhythm, a quiet motion that all of us, including this resting body, are drifting within. Nothing to follow, nothing to remember. Only the knowledge that everything is still opening very gently, very evenly, without hurry. And when that thought has settled enough, when there is no longer a need to imagine or explain, you can allow that flow to continue on your behalf. The universe does not need you to be awake in order to exist. It began without a sound, and it can continue through your sleep completely silent. After the slow expansion of the Big Bang, after space had grown wide enough for galaxies to form and stars to begin shining, the universe entered a very long phase of experimentation. There was no blueprint, no goal to be reached, only conditions appearing, changing, and fading away. Within that flow, some worlds came remarkably close to life, close enough that from a distance one might mistake them for having succeeded. There were planets that once had liquid water flowing across their surfaces, atmospheres thick enough to retain heat, temperatures mild, light sufficient, and the elements required for complex reactions. For a time, perhaps millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, everything seemed to be in the right place. And then, a single small change was enough for it all to slip from that fragile alignment. A central star grew less stable. A planet's magnetic field weakened. Its atmosphere was slowly stripped away by stellar winds. Temperatures shifted by only a few degrees, insignificant by cosmic standards, yet enough to break the delicate balance life depends upon. And so a world that almost succeeded quietly returned to stillness. These stories are not tragedies. The universe does not regard them as failures. It is only humans looking in who feel a faint sadness, not because those planets lost something, but because we are reminded that life was never guaranteed. It is not a reward for correct arrangement. It is a rare possibility appearing in narrow gaps of condition and disappearing when those gaps close. The balance life requires is not a static state, but a continuous dance. Everything must change, but not too quickly. It must be flexible, but not scattered. Fragile, but not easily broken. It is an almost paradoxical demand. And so it is no surprise that many worlds only brush against that threshold before slipping past it. When humans look at such near-miss worlds, we often search for moral lessons. We speak of the preciousness of life, of responsibility toward Earth. These reflections are not wrong, but at a deeper level, there is a quieter lesson that our existence is not the result of necessity, but of a chain of conditions that happen to remain balanced for long enough. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensée, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. That fear does not come from vastness, but from indifference. The universe does not need life in order to be complete. It does not grieve when a world loses its water. It does not mourn when an atmosphere dissolves. Its silence is not cruel, only impartial. And in that impartiality, there is a strangely healing quality. For if the universe makes no promises, it also betrays none. No commitment is broken when a planet becomes barren. No expectation is disappointed. There is only a process continuing according to laws that carry no emotion." When this understanding is brought back into human life, a familiar pressure begins to loosen. How often we believe that if we do everything right, if conditions are good enough, if effort is sufficient, then outcomes will be guaranteed. But the universe offers a gentler truth. Some things do not fail because we were wrong, but because the balance itself has changed. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." In the context of worlds that nearly came alive, this line no longer urges relentless striving. It becomes a quiet acceptance that existence itself, even for a finite span, is complete in its own way. A planet that once held oceans, even for a brief chapter of cosmic history, is not a mistake. It is a possibility that was tried, a branch that opened then closed. And perhaps human life is similar. Not every relationship, every dream, every phase needs to last in order to be meaningful. As the night grows deep, as this voice becomes familiar, like a background tone, you can let images of those worlds drift by, not as tragedies, but as gentle reminders that life is not inevitable. That your being here now, breathing, listening, is the result of a fragile balance that is held until this moment. From the universe's slow expansion to planets that nearly touched life. This current is gradually leading us toward a different posture toward ourselves. There is no need to cling tightly, no need to fear change. If something has existed even briefly, it has been complete within its own time. And within that awareness, sleep may arrive very softly, not as an escape, but as a natural continuation, like a world temporarily closing in silence, not because it failed, but because its cycle of balance has been enough. After passing through worlds that nearly touched life before quietly drifting away from it, our gaze turns back not with a sense of victory, but with a different kind of calm. Earth appears no longer as a favored exception, but as a possibility that managed to hold its balance long enough. Not a center, not a destination, simply one of the very few places that still remain. In a vast universe where most planets are either too hot, too cold, too chaotic, or too still to sustain the fragile processes of life, Earth does not stand out because it is perfect. It stands out because it is sufficient. Sufficient liquid water, sufficient energy from its central star, sufficient stability for biological cycles to repeat, adapt, and continue. But sufficient does not mean chosen. There is no evidence that the universe favored Earth over other worlds. The conditions here are not a reward, but the result of a chain of chance that was not interrupted too early. A chain that could have shifted with the slightest change, a different orbit, a weaker magnetic field, a larger collision, and the story would have turned another way. To say that Earth may not be special does not make it meaningless. On the contrary, it frees us from a familiar burden. The burden of having to prove that we deserve to exist. If Earth is not the center, then humans do not need to carry the role of being the center of all meaning. Nicolaus Copernicus once initiated a profound shift by removing Earth from the center of the universe. Yet it took much longer for humanity to fully feel the philosophical weight of that move. Not being at the center does not mean being excluded. It simply means we are somewhere looking at the world from where we happen to stand. Blaise Pascal wrote in Pensées Man is but a reed the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. Those words resonate softly when we look at Earth from afar. Fragile, yet capable of awareness. Small, yet able to reflect on that very smallness. And it is precisely this capacity that turns not special into a source of comfort rather than loss. Earth does not need to be central in order to be where we are. It does not need to be unique in order to be home. The value of a place does not come from whether the universe notices it, but from the fact that beings live there, feel there, and form bonds there. When we look back at worlds that nearly succeeded Earth, no longer appears as a grand triumph. It appears as a moment of balance that lasted longer than most. And within that moment, life learned to look back at itself, to ask questions, and to listen. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time to be human is to be already thrown into the world." We did not choose Earth, we appeared here. And because of that, meaning lies not in comparing this planet to others, but in staying with what is long enough to feel it. As night settles in, as large thoughts grow smaller, Earth no longer appears as a symbol. It appears as a familiar ground. Gravity holding you in place, air entering your lungs, biological rhythms slowing. No lofty philosophy is required to realize that where we are is not an abstract idea. It is the very tangible feeling of being supported. And perhaps it is here that a deep healing occurs. When Earth no longer needs to be special, we no longer need to be special in order to be allowed to exist. Being here is enough. Breathing is enough. Listening right now is enough. From worlds that nearly succeeded to a planet not at the center, this current is guiding us toward a gentle posture, gratitude without display. Not gratitude for being chosen, but for being allowed to remain for a time. Carl Sagan once wrote, "The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Yet a small stage does not make the moments upon it any less real. Earth may not be special to the universe, but to the beings who sleep, dream, love, and think upon its surface, it is the only place where all of that can happen." And as you allow awareness to slowly settle, as this voice blends into the rhythm of your own breathing, there is no need to carry any conclusion with you. Only this simple feeling that even without being central, even without being special by cosmic standards, Earth is where you are. And in this quiet moment, that is enough for sleep to arrive softly, naturally. When Earth is no longer seen as a center, but simply as a place we happen to be, another question slowly comes into view, very gently, very gradually. If life is not guaranteed, if it is fragile and rare, why does it keep appearing at all? Not once, but many times. Not in a single form, but through countless strange, quiet forms that do not ask to be recognized. Nature does not grow discouraged. Yet it does not strive in the way humans understand effort. Life does not rise again after failure because of belief. It does not learn from mistakes in a moral sense. It simply keeps trying because conditions allow it to. Where there is water, it tries chemistry. Where there is heat, it tries structure. Where conditions are harsh, it tries forms that are tougher, slower, smaller. In environments humans call uninhabitable, the cold darkness of the deep ocean, boiling hot springs, arid deserts, eternal ice life still appears. Not as a triumph, but as a response. Not to reach a goal, but as a simple answer to existing conditions to exist in whatever way is possible. These forms of life do not need to resemble one another to be called alive. They do not share an ideal template. They do not evolve to become higher, better, or more valuable. They only adapt. And adaptation itself does not require purpose. It does not aim toward a particular future. It is simply a continuous adjustment to the present. Charles Darwin once wrote in On the Origin of Species, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." This line is often read as advice to be flexible, to be quick. But at night, when read slowly, another meaning emerges. Life does not endure through strength or intelligence, but through a willingness to change without needing a reason. There is no grand plan for life. No evolutionary map drawn in advance. Each attempt opens a branch, and any branch may close at any time. This can unsettle the human mind. We are accustomed to seeking meaning, to believing that every effort must lead somewhere. But for nature, trying again carries no hope. It also carries no disappointment. It simply happens. When life is seen this way, a familiar burden begins to dissolve. The burden to progress, to achieve, to become a better version of oneself. Life does not demand this. It only requires conditions sufficient to continue, and when conditions change, it changes form or withdraws without self-blame. Henri Bergson once wrote in Creative Evolution, "Life is a tendency to act on inert matter, not a plan but a tendency, not a goal but a movement. When conditions allow, that tendency expresses itself. When they do not, it pauses. No verdict is passed." And perhaps here, healing appears very quietly. If life itself does not need purpose in order to continue, then humans, a conscious form of life, do not need to bind every moment to meaning. There are days without progress. There are phases of mere existence. and that does not make life any less worthy. The strange forms of life out there do not ask whether they deserve to exist. They do not compare themselves to others. They do not know success or failure. They simply respond to the world very slowly, very steadily, very precisely in their own way. When this understanding is brought back into inner life-breathing becomes lighter. Not every adaptation needs to be explained. Not every change needs to be shaped into a story. Some things happen simply to keep the current from breaking. Baruch Spinoza once wrote in Ethics, "Each thing as far as it can by its own power strives to persevere in its being. That striving carries no emotion. It is not noble. It is not tragic. It is simply a natural tendency to continue when possible, from an earth that is not special to a life that keeps trying." This current leads us away from the need to assign purpose to everything, not into meaninglessness, but into a quieter ground where existence does not require justification. As night deepens, as words begin to thin within the mind, you can let this idea settle like a very soft background, that there is no need to strive in the way humans often imagine. That adaptation can occur without goals. That continuing sometimes is simply continuing. And if today the life within you has only enough strength to exist, not to advance far, not to change much, that too is fully aligned with how the universe works. Nature does not grow discouraged, but it does not push. It allows attempts to unfold and then lets sleep arrive as a very gentle pause, not to end anything, but to prepare for another attempt at a slower, deeper, quieter rhythm. After listening to the way life keeps trying throughout the universe, patient, without purpose, without self-judgment, this current gently turns inward, not to search for new answers, but to recognize something deeply familiar. The human body also functions like a small universe. Within it, the most important processes do not require the attention of consciousness. They unfold in the background quietly, precisely, and persistently. Sleep is the softest doorway into that universe. No noise, no ritual, only the permission for the body to lower its pace. When consciousness withdraws, deeper activities begin their work, repairing, reorganizing, renewing. No explanations are offered. No reports are sent upward. The body does not need you to understand it in order to do what it does. In sleep, memory is rearranged. Neural connections are refined. Tiny injuries unnoticed during the day are mended by ancient mechanisms. Like the clouds of gas where stars are born, there is no clear moment of beginning. Only a process extended long enough for order to emerge. Perhaps this is why sleep arrives most easily when we stop trying, when we no longer treat it as a task to complete, when we stop forcing the body to rest according to the schedule of the mind. Sleep does not respond to commands. It responds to conditions like life, like the universe. Aristotle once wrote in De Anima, "The soul is in a way all existing things." Read slowly at night, this line feels like a reminder body and mind are not separate from the world. They mirror broader laws. Your biological rhythm, the cycles of waking and sleeping hormones, temperature, heartbeat, is a small reflection of larger cycles day and night. Movement and stillness, accumulation and release. The biological clock does not argue with you. It does not persuade. It simply knocks very gently, steadily through small signals, heavier eyelids, deeper breaths, thinning thoughts. When you listen, it guides you. When you ignore it, it waits patiently like nature itself. There is a particular kind of healing in realizing that you are not the sole operator of yourself. That older intelligences are at work in every cell, that the body knows how to restore itself without praise, that rest is not a reward for a good day, but a condition for life to continue. Baruch Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "The body cannot determine the mind to think, nor can the mind determine the body to motion or rest." Not separation, but simultaneity. When you allow the body to rest, the mind softens. When the mind softens, the body finds its rhythm again. No commander is needed, only permission. Restoration is not a miracle. It is the result of not interfering too much. Just as in the universe where great things form in silence, the body does its best work when it is not constantly monitored. When the night is deep enough, when stimulation is low enough, when consciousness stops demanding deeper processes, finally have space to unfold. Perhaps this is why modern exhaustion comes not only from doing too much, but from listening to too much. Too many calls for attention, too many demands to respond. Sleep is where those calls are gently turned down, not to escape, but to recover the ability to hear the underlying rhythms. Maurice Merleau-Ponty once wrote in Phenomenology of Perception, "The body is our general medium for having a world." At night, this becomes very concrete. Gravity holds you still. Air enters the lungs. The heartbeat sets the pace. You do not need to think in order to exist in this moment. The body is doing that for you. From life endlessly trying to the body as a small universe, this current completes a gentle circle. No grand purpose, no plan, only continuation at the right rhythm. When you allow yourself to sleep, you are trusting the same principle that keeps the universe moving, letting deeper processes work quietly in the background. And if something within you today is not yet ready to be repaired, not yet able to change, that is entirely fine. Restoration does not rush. It unfolds at its own pace. Just as stars need millions of years, the body needs quiet nights to do its work. Now, as this voice gradually becomes background, there is no need to follow further. Let your biological rhythm lead you. Let sleep arrive as a soft movement, not the end of consciousness, but the quiet continuation of life within the small universe that is already here. When the body has begun working in the background, when biological rhythms have lowered enough for consciousness to withdraw, another space opens not like a stage, but like a current. This is where dreams appear. They do not knock. They do not announce themselves. They do not ask for permission. They arrive when the mind no longer needs to control. Dreams are often misunderstood as messages that must be decoded. We ask what they mean, what they imply, what they warn of, or promise. But in the night when those questions are gently set aside, another possibility emerges. Dreams do not need to be understood. They are not messages. They are movement. Like currents of gas in the universe, dreams are how the mind releases excess energy. Image connects to image. Memory brushes against memory. Emotion passes through without requiring order. There is no mandatory storyline, no moral conclusion, only drift. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." Read slowly at night, this line no longer feels like a strict philosophical command, but like a gentle permission. There are experiences that do not need to become words. There are movements that do not need explanation. Dreams belong to that region. When we try to understand dreams, we pull them back into the harsh daylight where everything must have a reason. But dreams are born from a softer darkness. Their ambiguity is not a flaw, but a condition. Like starlight within clouds of gas, dream images glow because of the dark, not because they are dragged into inspection. Carl Jung once wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." This is often read as an invitation to interpret, but it can be read more slowly. Guiding words do not always point with signs. Sometimes they are simply rhythm, a guidance without destination, a feeling of being carried while drifting. Dreams do not ask to be remembered. In fact, most dreams are created to be forgotten, not because they lack meaning, but because their work is completed in the moment they occur. Like an exhale, like a wave reaching shore and retreating, a dream finishes what it needs to do and dissolves. When we release the need to remember, a familiar pressure eases. The pressure to hold on, to understand correctly, to interpret deeply enough. But dreams do not wait for us. They do not pause to be reread. They simply pass through, leaving behind a very thin residue, a feeling of lightness, of subtle order, even if it cannot be named. Henri Bergson once wrote in Matter and Memory, "The brain is not a seat of memory, but an organ of forgetting. Forgetting is not loss. Forgetting is a function." In this sense, dreams are an art of forgetting, helping the mind avoid becoming trapped in old images, old emotions, unfinished stories. When this is brought back into personal experience, a quiet tenderness appears. If last night you dreamed and remembered nothing, it does not mean you missed something. On the contrary, the mind may have worked so effectively that no trace was needed. Like a room tidied while you sleep, no report required, no proof left behind. Dreams do not need to be right. There are no good or bad dreams in a moral sense. There are only movements suited to the conditions of that night, sometimes chaotic, sometimes repetitive, sometimes empty. All of it is acceptable, because the purpose does not lie in content but in flow. Maurice Blanchot once wrote, "The dream is a second life, not a life to analyze, but a parallel one where rules soften, where consciousness rests. There the mind is allowed to play, to tangle, to be inconsistent. And that permission itself is healing. From the body as a small universe to dreams as free movement, this current carries us away from the need to control. There is no need to understand in order to be at ease, no need to remember in order to be complete. Some parts of life only need to be lived through. As this voice gradually becomes background as words begin to dissolve into your breathing, allow dreams to arrive in their own way. If images appear, let them drift. If nothing appears, that too is enough. No message required. No symbols. Nothing needs to be carried into the morning. For in the universe, both vast and intimate, not every movement requires an observer. Some movements only need to happen. And tonight, dreams may do their work in silence, allowing you to sink deeper into a peace that needs no words. When dreams have finished their work and dissolve quietly, another sensation may remain faint, almost weightless. Not a clear thought, but a loosening. As if the boundary between inside and outside is no longer drawn so sharply. It is within this state that an idea can be touched without being grasped. We are made of the same substance. The atoms in your body, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, were not born with you. They existed long before. Some were forged in the cores of ancient stars. Some were released when those stars reached the end of their lives. They drifted through space, combined and separated. And then for a very brief moment in the life of the universe, they became you. This idea is often spoken with awe. But in the night when it is allowed to settle, what remains is not astonishment but familiarity. There is no hard boundary between your body and the night sky. No absolute line dividing me from not me. Only temporary structures of the same current of matter moving at different rhythms. Heraclitus once wrote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." This is usually understood as constant change. But when heard slowly, another depth appears. Not only does the river change, but the one who steps into it is no longer the same. Matter flows. Forms arrive and depart. There is no final point to hold on to. Your body in this moment is only an arrangement. A temporary order sustained by biological rhythms, cycles of exchange, and continuous processes of renewal. With every breath, you exchange matter with the world. With every heartbeat, atoms travel farther along a small circuit. There is no moment when you are completely closed off. And for this reason, the boundaries we usually feel skin-shaped name are in fact soft outlines, clear enough for living, for relating, for recognizing. But they are not walls. They are zones of transition. Baruch Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "The more we understand individual things, the more we understand God." This need not be read religiously. It can be felt as a reminder. The more deeply we look into a single being, the more we see that it does not stand alone. It opens into a network of relations, causes, and continuities extending beyond itself. To say that we are made of the same substance as the stars does not make us grander. On the contrary, it softens the self. There is less need to be different at all costs, less pressure to cling to a fixed identity. If all forms are temporary, then change is not loss, but the most natural thing there is. In the universe, no form is guaranteed to last forever. Stars are born and fade, planets form and cool, living bodies do the same. But this fading is not disappearance, it is transformation. Matter does not leave the universe, it only changes roles. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything is only for a day, both that which remembers and that which is remembered." Not to make us sad, but to make us lighter. When everything is temporary, there is no need to hold on with tension. We can be fully present in a moment, and then let it go, like an exhale. There is a deep healing in realizing that you are not an isolated entity drifting through a foreign universe. You are part of the same current of matter experiencing itself through countless forms. This does not erase your individuality. It simply places it within a wider, gentler context. When this understanding returns to the night, to the sleep drawing near, another sense of safety emerges. Not because everything will turn out as the human mind hopes, but because nothing is truly separated enough to fall into nothingness. Even when consciousness pauses, matter continues to move. Even while you sleep, that current carries you. From dreams that need no interpretation to the awareness that everything arises from the same ground, this flow brings you to a very quiet place where you do not need to keep yourself separate in order to be yourself, where you do not need to defend boundaries too tightly to feel safe. Now, as this voice has grown slow and low enough, you can allow the idea to dissolve into the background. There is no need to remember it, no need to carry it as knowledge. Just a very gentle sense that the body lying here is not opposed to the universe. It is continuing the universe in a temporary form long enough for you to rest. And within that continuation, sleep is no longer a withdrawal, but emerging, gentle, deep, and entirely natural. And now, as this current has traveled far enough not to find a final answer, but to slow the need to keep following, Perhaps it is time for you to carry nothing more. No need to remember what you have heard. No need to weave it into a system. No need to hold on to any meaning as something precious to be stored away. Everything has already done its work very gently. Here there is no requirement to stay, no task to listen until the end. If you feel yourself drifting, that is not missing anything. It is simply the moment when consciousness stops standing apart and allows another movement to take over. Just as the universe continues to expand without anyone watching the deeper processes within you, do not need supervision to unfold in their own rhythm. The voice may grow sparse, not because the story has ended, but because no more words are needed. The spaces between thoughts lengthen, and within those spaces the body returns to its familiar pace. Breath slows, heartbeat steadies, thoughts loosen like mist. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Not as advice to seek stillness elsewhere, but as a reminder that it is already here once you stop searching. Quiet does not need to be created. It only needs permission. This video does not need to end. It can simply fade like a light turned down, not to be switched off, but to let the night finish the remaining work. Words dissolve into background sound. Sound dissolves into breath, and breath dissolves into sleep with no clear boundary to mark the transition. You do not need to keep listening. You do not need to remain. The universe was continuing before you listened, and it will continue while you sleep. Within that flow, nothing is forgotten. There is only a very slow, very steady movement carrying all temporary forms, including the one lying quietly here. If there comes a moment when you can no longer tell where the voice ends and your own thoughts begin, that is entirely fine. It is not disorientation. It is simply the moment when you no longer need to be at the center of the experience. And then without announcement, without closure, sleep may arrive, not as a stopping point, but as a very gentle dissolving where the universe continues on your behalf in silence.